Iris, the kingdom's strongest saint, was betrayed mid-journey when her junior apprentice struck her down while the hero, her fiancé, stood by and let it happen. Sunlight poured through a dense forest canopy as something stirred beneath the leaves, slowly waking from a deep and unfamiliar sleep. The figure jumped upright, insisting she was still the strongest saint in the kingdom, and that, of course, she remained alive after such an attack. Iris recalled being cut apart and fed to a monster, yet she refused to give up casting recovery magic inside its mouth until she survived. Iris realized she was naked, assuming digestive fluids had melted her clothing away, then noticed something far stranger: she could not feel her legs. Iris's upper body now sat atop a massive fanged flower, her human torso rising from petals while thick vines coiled around a monstrous plant body. Iris recognized the creature from a monster encyclopedia. Realizing with dawning horror that she was now sitting on top of a plant-type monster, she pinched the plant's petal and felt the sensation herself, confirming the plant had truly become part of her own body. Iris understood she had transformed from human into a plant monster, specifically an Alrone, as vines crawled and shifted beneath her. Fragments of her identity returned to Iris. She had once been a saint named Iris, and that saint had been killed. Born the second daughter of a duke in Gardenia Kingdom, Iris wielded the strongest holy magic at 17 and set out with a hero. Her apprentice, a fellow saint, attacked without warning while their group neared the demon lord, with only the hero, her fiancé, nearby. In her final moments, memories surfaced of Komurasaki Ayame, the high school girl she had been before reincarnating as a saint. Iris wondered if remembering that past life meant anything, since no divine gifts or overpowered skills came with it. And then the monster devoured her. Her divine recovery magic fused her body with the flower monster instead of letting her die, perhaps granting another chance at life. Iris could only recall scattered moments from high school, remembering mostly that she had been an otaku with everything else hazy. In summary, Iris had lived as a high school girl, then a saint, and now existed as an Alrone, a plant monster. Iris wondered how she would manage this new existence, then felt something warm and sticky unwrap suddenly across her chest. Iris declared she was finished, insisting she hadn't even reached that age nor had such experiences as nectar began leaking from her body. Curious about the trickle, Iris tested another petal and discovered even her tears had turned into sweet nectar as well. Iris discovered the sweet nectar dripping from her mouth and realized she could concentrate hard enough to control exactly where it came from. Determined not to dwell on despair, Iris decided that as long as she kept living, good things would eventually come her way. A massive horned bear emerged from the trees, growling low, clearly far too large and strange to be any ordinary forest animal. The creature was a lab favor, known for claws sharp enough to fell trees and jaws strong enough to crush armor completely. The bear sniffed the air hungrily, and Iris guessed its small size, marked it as a youngling drawn by her sweet nectar. Iris recoiled from the bear's slobbering affection, frustrated that her rooted body left her completely unable to flee the situation. The bear huffed and trudged closer, leaving Iris desperate to find some way of protecting herself from the approaching threat. Iris remembered Alrones were not particularly strong, but they were known for luring prey with nectar before swallowing them whole. Iris resolved to fight back, deciding her only available weapons were the vines now growing directly from her own body. Her vine lashed out at the bear repeatedly, but the creature kept advancing, forcing Iris to think of another strategy quickly. She remembered childhood days fishing with her father, using bait to draw creatures close before reeling them in successfully. Iris decided to lure the bear with a drop of her nectar, planning to catch it the moment it drew near. The bear got tangled while licking up her nectar, and Iris scolded it for daring to steal from her body. Startled by the bear's bite, Iris released a cloud of purple dust from her body as a defensive reaction. The dust turned out to be poison, knocking the bear out completely, and leaving Iris surprised by her own hidden strength. Iris felt hunger creeping in after the fight, noticing her body signaling malnourishment and a growing lack of energy. Her monster instincts urged her to eat the fallen bear, while her human side quietly resisted that unsettling temptation. Instinct won out, and Iris devoured the bear whole, accepting that she was no longer human in any real sense. She thought back to the life she lost, the revenge she wanted, and the peaceful future she could never reclaim now. Iris admitted she didn't fully understand her new existence yet, but she understood, clearly she was now a plant monster. Iris stretched contentedly in the sunlight, realizing her new body craved only sunlight, water, and food. Nothing more complex than that. A curious deer wandered near her, but her vines shot out fast, dragging the startled creature straight into her waiting petals. Chewing thoughtfully, Iris decided that from now on she would embrace life as a quiet, elegant, decorative plant, much like a flower. Iris reflected on her strange path. A Japanese schoolgirl turned saint turned Alrone, something she never imagined even in her wildest dreams. A frightened rabbit wandered near her petals, and despite her claim of being harmless, Iris devoured the creature without hesitation. Bored and completely free, Iris began studying her surroundings, recalling that Komurasaki Ayame had once read about Alrones in books. Mandrakes, fictional plants known for piercing screams when uprooted, were often used as potion ingredients and were siblings of eggplants. Iris wondered if Alrones counted as mandrake relatives, then panicked, questioning whether that somehow made her related to actual eggplants. She examined her own reproductive structure, discovering her stamens had degraded, leaving her as a purely female, unisexual flower creature. As a former closet otaku, Komurasaki Ayame had always found plants a familiar and comforting topic during her school years. She often spent lunch periods buried in library books, favoring plant encyclopedias above every other subject available on the shelves. That old fascination had grown into genuine love, and now a bee's buzzing pulled Iris straight back into the present. The creature was massive compared to normal honeybees, and Iris recalled its proper name was Zornbean, from monster classification texts. Since she was no longer human, Iris assumed stings shouldn't concern her anymore, though she still disliked bugs on principle. She remembered bees were natural pollinators, meaning as a flower she would eventually have to accept their persistent visits completely. Pollination let farmers grow fruit as bees carried pollen from flower to flower, letting it settle inside each waiting pistil. Iris realized that process meant bees essentially pollinated flowers by force, moving from one to another without asking permission first. Panicking at the thought, Iris demanded the bee stay far away, refusing pollination from some unfamiliar male flower entirely. She declared she would fight to protect her chastity, insisting she was no promiscuous flower willing to accept anyone's advances. The bee proved impossibly nimble, dodging every vine Iris launched while she struggled hopelessly to land a single hit. Startled by its sudden screech, Iris reacted fast, releasing a fresh burst of poison pollen directly toward the buzzing creature. The poison barely fazed it, leaving Iris injured and wishing she still had Saint magic to heal herself. She tried casting Lichtbogen anyway, and though nothing visible happened, her vines began growing in response to the light. Iris dodged the bee's attack, then focused her light recovery magic, watching her vines stretch and grow with each cast. The lengthened vine snapped forward and struck the bee cleanly, sending the creature wobbling through the air in stunned confusion. Iris wrapped the bee tight and declared victory, catching her breath, unaware that greater trouble was already approaching from the shadows. A swarm of bees descended together, overwhelming her completely, forcing Iris to admit defeat against numbers. She simply could not fight. Teeny bee children pestered her for their missing father, and Iris panicked, insisting she would never let herself become their mother. Determined to survive, Iris decided protecting herself mattered most. Curling her vines tight to guard her chastity from the swarm, the bees kept gnawing at her vines for hours, leaving Iris exhausted and desperate for them to finally give up and leave. Thirst crept in and her magic grew weaker, leaving Iris worried as her vines started losing strength against the swarm. Unable to fight them all at once, Iris searched her mind for some way to make the bees leave peacefully. She wondered what the bees truly wanted from her, then realized nectar was likely the answer all along. Iris offered nectar on a vine, hoping the gesture would satisfy them without forcing any unwanted contact. The bees swarmed toward the offering eagerly, drinking eagerly, while Iris watched with cautious relief at her clever solution. Exhausted and thirsty, Iris drifted to sleep afterward, grateful the encounter had ended peacefully despite her drained condition. The next morning, numerous Zornbean greeted her again, arriving before a full day had even passed since their visit. Resigned to the idea of eventual pollination, Iris apologized to the bees for not understanding their persistent buzzing requests. Completely spent, with drooping petals, Iris begged the bees to leave her alone and search elsewhere for nectar instead. As if understanding her plea, the bees turned and drifted back into the surrounding forest, leaving Iris finally safe. Before she could fully recover, the bees returned again, this time dropping a boar carcass beside her as an offering. Iris stared at the gift in disbelief, asking if the bees had truly brought this offering specifically for her. Watching them circle protectively, Iris realized the bees no longer saw her as prey, but as a friend worth guarding. Iris smiled brightly, surrounded by her bee companions, calling them her first true friends since becoming an Alrone monster. Reflecting on the day, Iris realized this moment marked her first real step toward building a peaceful paradise.
Multiple avians abruptly escaped across the forest heavens after sensing danger nearby. A brutal band of Barbaraphon creatures then emerged as charging through the trees aggressively. Seeing the threat near, Alrone collected her faithful Zornbines and readied to defend herself instantly. The cluster swiftly encircled the invading creatures as Alrone watched the battle from a safe distance. Outnumbered by almost 100 Zornbines, the Barbaraphon band was entirely beaten within instants. After the fight finished, Alrone softly finished off the wounded insects that could no longer survive. Unexpectedly, the leftover Zornbines ignored their deceased partners and concentrated only on gathering nectar. Alrone later understood the earlier Barbaraphon remnant had called backup before being beaten yesterday. In return for sap, innumerable Zornbines now guarded Alrone and carried her nourishment from the forest. As her unusual alliance grew tougher, Alrone cheerfully pictured creating a tranquil group called Forest Lilies. Worry about coming attacks stayed in Alrone's mind after the fight against the Barbaraphon creatures ended. An unusual white avian shortly emerged alongside her flower and quietly pecked at the ground nearby. Its peculiar plumage fascinated Alrone since she had never encountered an entirely white avian before. Interest shoved her to extend a tendril cautiously toward the little creature for a closer look. Before the tendril reached it, the avian swiftly scattered its pinions and disappeared into the sky. As the Zornbines bore away the beaten creatures, Alrone silently watched them from her flower. Later that night, peculiar warmth covered the forest as Alrone lay alone beneath the sky. Abruptly, a vivid object crossed the darkness above the timber like a blazing, soaring mass. Morning shortly reached, but the unusual warmth kept and turned Alrone's peaceful forest life miserable. Parched earth prevented her rootlets from assembling sufficient water, leaving Alrone exhausted under the intense weather. Urgent for water, Alrone collected nearby plants because their rootlets still contained some moisture. Days kept passing lacking shower, and the worsening drought gradually shoved her toward exhaustion. Irritation eventually overwhelmed Alrone, causing her to scream noisily as begging the heavens for rain. Amid her despair, the unusual white avian returned and silently stayed beside her flower once again. Observing the avian fly openly through the heavens formed, Alrone wished she could search for water herself. Driven by thirst and irritation, Alrone threatened the white avian as her blossoms kept drying out. Instead of fleeing entirely, the avian brushed earlier her tendril and scattered drops of water nearby. Only then did Alrone understand the avian had recently bathed someplace with leftover water. Although the little amount aided momentarily, her body still frantically required far more water to survive. A week later, the same shining object crossed the night heavens anew above the forest. The shining object vanished toward the remote peaks where the demon ruler's followers supposedly lived. Brief recollections of her prior partners crossed Alrone's mind before she compelled herself to concentrate elsewhere. Meanwhile, the unceasing drought kept destroying her blossoms, leaves, and feeble plant body gradually. Desperation shoved Alrone to stare at the vacant heavens as praying for shower once again. At last, weighty shower eventually poured across the forest, allowing Alrone to recover with joy. After the shower returned, Alrone cheerfully rejoiced jointly with the faithful Zornbines around her flower. That tranquil instant finished swiftly when the insects brought another strange creature from the forest. Aggressive man, eating plant shortly emerged before Alrone and terrified her instantly with its appearance. Bewilderment covered Alrone's mind as she questioned whether the insects expected her to feed the beast nectar too. Despite her terror, Alrone cautiously neared the hostile plant and attempted to turn its ally. As competing with the man, eating blossom, Alrone abruptly spotted her body start to transform strangely. After consuming the aggressive plant, she uncovered in skill to form comparable flowers from her vines. Surprisingly, each plant or plant creature she devoured permitted her to reproduce their traits afterward. Thrilled by the discovery, Alrone called her newly woke strength botanical creation. From that day forward, she collected and assimilated nearby plants to ready for coming dangers ahead. After preparing herself for coming threats, Alrone eventually regained multiple tranquil days inside the forest. Lacking warning, a weighty object abruptly collided nearby and disrupted her quiet life once again. Surprise instantly scattered across Alrone's face as she gawked at the unknown figure before her. Lying unconscious alongside her blossom, a person maiden emerged while the surrounding Zornbines watched carefully nearby.
Alrone escaped the village after causing her grandfather behind to keep practice solitary. Unusual soaring beasts abruptly encircled a young boy deep inside the forest. Their keen talons hit him continually until he collapsed from the assault. Nearby, Alrone spotted the unconscious kid alongside her huge plant body and cautiously approached him. After confirming he was still breathing,
She examined the offering cautiously as the beasts hovered around them. Cautiously, Alrone placed the toxic youth onto her blossom as examining his weak condition. Realizing healing magic could not mend others, she sought for another method to extract the venom. Shortly later, sap collected inside her mouth before she fed it to the unconscious kid. Instants later, the youth eventually unfolded his eyes and spotted his body had recovered. Alarm abruptly overtook him, causing the terrified kid to scream at the sight of the creature nearby. Fearfully, the youth questioned whether Alrone planned to devour him after awakening inside her blossom. Startled by the query, she swiftly attempted to refute it as struggling to speak clearly. Sweat coated her face as shattered words gradually shaped from her unknown human voice. Amazement replaced the youth's terror once he understood the creature could understand human language. Flustered yet hopeful, Alrone questioned him to halt calling her a creature and use a gentler name instead. As observing the youth closely, Alrone recalled that her pheromones could attract people normally. Interest shortly overcame her restraint, leading Alrone to pull the flustered kid into a sudden embrace, relaxing jointly atop the huge blossom. The youth gradually relaxed beside her warm presence and sweet scent. Instant later, sap gradually overflowed from Alrone's hands as she readied more remedy for him. Although bothered by the unusual treatment, the youth unwillingly embraced the nectar after hearing her explanation. After sipping the sap, the youth gradually regained his composure as looking around the strange flower nest. Shortly later, he clarified that the forest stood close the boundary between two rival countries. Learning the present year stunned Alrone, who understood 3 years had passed since her transformation. Query after question trailed as she sought for reports about heroes, demons, and individuals from her past. Sadly, the youth understood small about latest events. Though he mentioned the saint remained beside the hero. Fury covered Alrone after discovering the saint had wed the hero and obtained wealth inside the palace. Meanwhile, the nervous youth cautiously questioned whether he could eventually depart the giant flower. Instead, Alrone instantly halted him and maintained that he stay by her side longer. Amused by their conversations, she kept feeding him sap as keeping him close to her body. Over the following days, the youth steadily turned dependent on Alrone's sugary sap and constant care. Days later, Armin turned entirely attached to Alrone's sap as sharing the account of his troubled past. Amid their time jointly, Alrone uncovered she could imitate noises after absorbing another unusual plant. Later, she experimented with mystical produce and employed them beside her sap to support Armin. Despite her composed behavior, Alrone acknowledged that normal creatures would have already eaten the powerless boy desiring company and entertainment. She chose to retain Armin nearby while helping him improve his magic. Believing Armin held mystical aptitude, Alrone cautioned him that ignoring training would only bring regret later. Interest shortly led the youth to ask whether Alrone herself could actually use magic. After learning sap presented as a reward, Armin instantly consented to begin practicing seriously. From atop her huge blossom, Alrone steadily clarified how mana could be shaped into spells. Under her instruction, Armin effectively performed a little spell for the initial time, and celebrated excitedly. As observing Armin practice, Alrone understood he was faltering to collect mana correctly inside his body. Steadily, she guided him to envision the current of magic focusing into a single point. Sweat coated Armin's face as he kept forcing more mana jointly under her supervision. Cautiously observing his state, Alrone cautioned him to understand his limits before releasing the spell. A mighty eruption of magic eventually erupted across the forest, causing Armin stunned by his success. Exhausted yet thrilled, Armin smiled confidently after effectively casting his initial mighty wind spell. Shortly later, he identified the bird-shaped magic soaring across the heavens as his grandfather's technique. Steadily, Armin clarified that the spell permitted his grandfather to observe remote places through the avian's vision. Concern swiftly scattered across Alrone's face after realizing the aged man could finally discover her location. Fearing exposure, she ordered Armin to return dwelling and retain their time jointly entirely secret. Before sending Armin away, Alrone formed a unique solid sap infused with mighty healing magic. The completed sap orb shone brightly after the magic stabilized inside its hardened shape. Cautiously, Armin gulped the orb as Alrone clarified it would ease his future withdrawal symptoms. Greed swiftly returned as the delighted youth pleaded Alrone for another sugary sap marble. After receiving a second orb, Armin cheerfully stated goodbye and eventually departed from the forest. Quietly, Alrone observed Armin vanish into the afar after their long time jointly ended. Recollections of the youth's heat and closeness stirred an unusual feeling of nostalgia within her heart. Sitting solitary atop the huge blossom, Alrone silently reflected on the person life she once possessed. Although she thought their paths would never cross anew, she wished the sap would guard Armin safely. Multiple tranquil days passed later until the known buzzing beasts returned to her forest once more. Abruptly, an enormous horned animal collided into Alron's domain while thick saliva dripped from its mouth. An elderly sage visited a troubled village after faltering to eliminate deadly creatures earlier. Meanwhile, a silent orphaned child maiden called Roof, ready to leave the house and say farewell properly. Concealed beneath her cloak, the emotionless kid quietly listened to the adults discussing her coming. Shortly later, the sage pitied Roof after learning her parents perished from a monster attack. Before departing, the aged man cautioned her about deadly forests as discussing unusual plant-like monsters nearby. After placing a defensive shield around the village, the aged sage reassured Roof that creatures would stay away. Nearby, Armin readied to depart beside his grandfather after returning securely from the forest. Enthusiasm covered the youth as they headed toward the peaks to investigate accounts about a dangerous dragon. As traveling jointly, the sage spotted Armin had turned unusually energetic since his disappearance. Meanwhile, stories scattered about intelligent creatures capable of stealing arms and assailing reckless adventurers. Amid the journey, the wanderers suspected a deadly disturbance was scattering farther inside the forest. Elsewhere, Roof silently questioned whether Alrons were genuinely as frightening as individuals claimed. About a week after Armin departed, Alron kept dwelling calmly within her forest domain. Lacking warning, a frightening existence abruptly emerged nearby and disrupted the forest's calm atmosphere. Instantly recognizing the creature as a feared ISEKAI'D wolf, Alron understood it vastly surpassed normal creatures. Cautiously, Alron neared the ISEKAI'D wolf as observing the creature's motions across her domain. Abruptly, the animal unleashed a brutal shockwave that tore through the encircling forest. At initial, Alron thought the beast ruled the forest until unusual noises disrupted her thoughts. Booming, snapping noises reverberated continually as something massive forced its way through the trees nearby. Uneasily, Alron understood another unknown existence was swiftly advancing their position from deeper within the forest. Lacking warning, another huge beast abruptly smashed into the ISEKAI'D wolf and sent it crashing backward. From the forest depths, a gigantic bear-like creature emerged as timber splintered beneath its massive body. Frightening roars reverberated across the region, causing Alron to tremble from the immense pressure. Although bound temporarily, the gigantic lab fader readily shattered free from the encircling tendrils. Instants later, the monstrous ursine glared toward Alron after brutally tearing apart the snared ISEKAI'D wolf. Smiling anxiously, Alron attempted settling the gigantic ursine by pretending innocence about the missing creature. Carelessly, she kept denying duty as acting joyful, despite the creature's growing suspicion toward her. Abruptly realizing threat neared, Alron named for her insect servants to rescue her immediately. Bewilderment scattered across her face after the usual cluster faltered to emerge and protect their master. Only a sole insect eventually reached, causing the furious bear even more irritated than before. Gradually, the enormous ursine rotated toward Alron, after noticing her unusual movements behind the trees. Before escaping, the leftover insect was abruptly hit down by the creature's powerful attack. Horror covered Alron after realizing the whole insect cluster had already been wiped out. Knowing flee was impossible for her plant body, she readied herself for a urgent amazement assault. Resolve replaced terror as Alron commanded her carnivorous blossoms to chomp straight into the giant bear. Instantly, Alron's carnivorous blossoms latched onto the huge ursine and chomped repeatedly into its thick fur. Next, hardened wooden tendrils hit the ISEKAI'D wolf multiple times, but faltered to earnestly injure the monster. Realizing normal attacks were useless, Alron readied a tougher concealed method against the overwhelming beast. A erupted of spores exploded from her blossom body and scattered straight toward the massive creature. Sadly, the ISEKAI'D wolf simply sneezed later, displaying Alron that her strongest assault barely affected it. After reconsidering her faltered assault, Alron understood she required distant greater power to defeat the giant bear. Assuredly, she emitted a deadly purple mist that seemed capable of bringing down the creature. Abruptly, severe agony scattered through Alron's body as something hit her flower from afar. Surprise covered her face after discovering an enormous tree trunk soaring straight toward her position. The brutal assault pierced her bulb body strongly, forcing Alron to mend herself as digestive liquids leaked out. Once the mist vanished, the gigantic ISEKAI'D wolf stayed entirely unharmed and progressed toward Alron. Terror scattered across her face as the huge animal neared while saliva dripped from its mouth. Gradually, the ISEKA'D wolf revealed its enormous liquor and readied to devour the weakened plant monster. Before escaping turned possible, the beast gulped Alron and her blossom body entire. Coated in mucus and digestive liquids, Alron trembled in terror as snared inside the monster's stomach. Frantically, Alron resisted as the ISEKA'D wolf attempted tearing her feeble body apart for the sap inside. Meanwhile, digestive liquids kept melting her blossom body as the huge beast held her firmly in place. Alarm entirely overtook Alrone after realizing demise was advancing quicker than expected. As her vision blurred, urgent ideas covered her mind as she fought against fading consciousness. Even close to demise, Alrone still wished for tranquil days, fresh allies, and a quiet life as a plant. Resolve returned, as Alrone rejected to accept demise inside the monstrous Hazenwolf. Abruptly, her carnivorous blossoms erupted outward and chomped strongly into the giant beast's flesh. Agony scattered across the H-Phalanwolf as tendrils and blossoms continued tearing into its body relentlessly. Instead than submission, Alrone collected her leftover power and prepared to fight like a stubborn plant monster. A little avian pecked curiously at the silent Alrone relaxing among the forest plants. Recollections of the maiden and the Alrone blended jointly, bearing the same tranquil wish to live calmly. Although demise terrified them, pair souls still fought to endure inside their harsh world. Like persistent blooms growing through harsh earth. Abruptly, an enormous animal collided into the region, shattering the peaceful atmosphere and forcing the reborn Alrone to confront danger before her new life truly began. Sweat coated Alrone's face as she understood the huge animal could destroy her delicate body easily. Rootlets scattered strongly underground, allowing her plant body to stay anchored as supporting her whole form. Keen tendrils and carnivorous blossoms assaulted intensely when the beast tried ripping her from the earth. Despite the brutal ordeal, the gigantic beast kept smashing through her defenses without slowing down. Terror covered Alrone's mind after noticing the creature's power vastly exceeded the earlier attacks she survived. Alrone directed the carnivorous blossoms toward the man, eating plants as the huge Papa Ursine charged frantically nearby. Surprisingly, the animal slowed down, sniffing the sky and wobbling strangely alongside her rooted body. Careful inspection disclosed an older injury on the beast's arm that Alrone had never made herself. Remembering the spores and insect attacks from earlier, she understood the toxin was steadily weakening the beast. Instead of confronting Papa Ursine straight, Alrone chose to exhaust its energy through a prolonged endurance fight. Papa Ursine abruptly leaned nearer and started licking the sugary nectar dripping from Alrone's mouth. The exhausted animal halted, attempting to uproot her, and concentrated entirely on the unusual nectar instead. Disgusted by the circumstance, Alrone sought frantically for another method to distract the beast. As considering swiftly, she questioned if something more precious than nectar could capture the monster's attention. After settling herself, Alrone cautiously readied a fresh strategy using her plant body to lure Papa Bear away safely. Alrone risked employing mending magic on Papa Ursine, knowing defeat would only restore the deadly beast's strength. As focusing on her magic, the sap production abruptly halted and confused the hungry creature. Lacking warning, Papa Ursine seized her brutally, forcing Alrone into immediate alarm and desperation. Realizing she had no time left to hesitate, Alrone swiftly activated the dangerous strategy she readied earlier. A condensed sphere named the Sap Orb eventually emerged, becoming her last chance to control the situation safely. Alrone formed a concentrated sap orb covered with mending magic and an irresistible sweetness for the beast. Papa Ursine instantly reacted to the aroma, drooling heavily as becoming entirely fascinated by the strange sphere. Employing the orb as bait, Alrone guided the exhausted beast away as restoring its energy little by little. The shining sap orb floated cautiously nearby, as Papa Ursine kept chasing it without hesitation. However, the greedy animal abruptly misplaced patience and smashed its talons down onto Alrone's rooted body again. Papa Ursine stomped frantically as chasing the floating sap orb around Alrone's flower body. Reassurance emerged on Alrone's face after shifting the deadly orb away from herself. Assuredly, she presented the shining orb to lure the animal further into the forest. The shining sphere soared through the sky as Papa Ursine hurried after it immediately. Abruptly, the orb vanished, causing Alrone stunned by the unforeseen outcome. A sudden avian swooped down and snatched the floating sap orb before Papa Ursine reached it. The little avian bore the shining orb away proudly through the open sky. Surprise coated Alrone's face as her cautiously readied strategy collapsed instantly. Observing the avian fly further away, she understood the terrible moment could not be worse. Lacking another sap orb ready, Alrone feared Papa Ursine would assault her again immediately. Papa Ursine observed the avian bearing the sap marble, while Alrone waited nervously nearby. Instead of assailing anew, the exhausted animal gradually rotated away from Alrone's flower body. Rustling noises reverberated through the forest as Papa Ursine eventually wandered farther into the trees. Reassurance washed over Alrone after realizing she had endured the deadly encounter securely. Exhausted from terror and tension, Alrone curled up inside her blossoms to rest silently. Alrone understood the little white avian bearing the sap marble could never escape Papa Bear safely. Remembering the drought, She remembered how the unusual avian had silently aided her before. Normally, the avian only circled around her blossom body momentarily before soaring away again. Although exhausted, Alrone concerned Papa Ursine would keep chasing the innocent beast ceaselessly. Distant across the forest, the avian escaped frantically as Papa Bear stomped after the glowing nectar marble. The white avian abruptly emitted the sap orb while flying high above the forest. Papa Ursine kept chasing the shining sphere as the avian fled safely into the distance. Distant away from the threat, the avian touched down close an old house after ensuring enough separation. A youthful maiden silently observed the exhausted avian while thinking about Alrone's fragile condition. Believing Alrone could not endure solitary, the enigmatic maiden chose she needed to protect her personally. At 6 years aged, a youthful maiden obtained black magic and misplaced her peaceful childhood forever. Witch hunters shortly pursued her household, forcing them to flee continually between remote places. Despite becoming a witch, she still dwelt cheerfully alongside her caring parents for multiple years. Finally, the household settled close Gardenia's borders and enjoyed a brief period of normal existence jointly. Sadly, the tranquil days finished swiftly, bringing another severe change to the young girl's fragile life. The youthful witch stood quietly inside the ruined home as agonizing memories filled her mind again. After becoming an orphaned child, Fury drove her to seek for the ape creatures responsible for everything. Amid her journey, she abruptly encountered unusual insects encircling an unfamiliar plant. Like woman, gazing nearer, the witch understood the lovely woman before her was unlike any person she had seen. Surprise scattered across her face after noticing the enigmatic woman's deeper body was actually a giant plant monster. The witch descended silently after the fight finished, and the beaten ape monsters collapsed nearby. Observing Alrone alongside the deceased foes, she understood the plant monster had avenged her parents. Admiration gradually grew inside her after witnessing Alrone's immense power and composed existence. Although she weighed Alrone deadly, the witch still could not entirely stay away from her. From that day forward, the youthful witch often returned to see the enigmatic plant lady whenever possible. Amid the severe summer warmth, the youthful witch regularly carried water to help Alrone survive comfortably. After seeing Alrone talking gently with a youth, she discovered that intelligent plant creatures were called Alrones. Silent jealousy emerged inside the witch as she observed Alrone interact kindly with somebody else nearby. Still, admiration and thanks shoved her to keep caring for the peculiar plant creature patiently. Over time, the witch started believing Alrone was genuinely unique and unlike anyone she had ever known. The youthful witch chose to keep caring for the powerless talking blossom hidden deep within the forest. Weighty shower eventually reached, allowing Alrone to celebrate cheerfully while absorbing the refreshing water. After settling down, Alrone started fretting about Papa Ursine and coming dangers waiting nearby. Although the sap orb brought temporary safety, she understood the huge animal would eventually return again, incapable to shift openly from her rooted body. Alrone sadly wished she could flee the deadly forest herself. Deep underground, Alrone uncovered a scarce orchid sustained by fungi and concealed from normal foes. Recalling information from her earlier existence, she recognized the unusual plant endured beneath the surface for years. Shortly later, the orchid's skills scattered through her rootlets after she absorbed its power completely. Enthusiasm covered Alrone as she tested fresh underground tunnels that could guard her from coming threats. Meanwhile, the known white avian silently returned and circled above the forest glade once anew. Multiple days passed calmly after the Papa Ursine incident, and the white avian securely returned alone. Since the huge animal never emerged anew, Alrone assumed the avian had delivered the nectar marble elsewhere. Meanwhile, the mischievous avian touched down nearby bearing an unusual blossom while Alrone formed a new idea. Lacking warning, tendrils abruptly chased the avian across the glade as it tried escaping quickly. Although all finished securely, Alrone still recalled the terror caused by the stolen marble that day. Hungry tendrils abruptly erupted from the earth as Alrone attempted catching the teasing white bird. Swiftly noticing the assault, the avian fled as still carrying the strange flower in its beak. Rapid pinions bore the little beast safely across the forest before the vines could reach it. From above the timber, the terrified avian understood a slight delay would have rotated it into Alrone's meal. After the chase finished, Alrone curiously spotted the peculiar blossom the avian had accidentally dropped behind. Cautiously inspecting the dropped blossom, Alrone identified it as a lovely red rotose with sharp thorns. As holding the blossom, she understood wild avians normally carried plants only for important reasons. Shortly later, the answer turned obvious after she spotted the avians happily building a nest together. Bitterness covered Alrone as she compared their tranquil romance to her isolated existence as a rooted creature. Recollections of betrayal returned, causing her wonder how differently her prior person existence could have ended. Isolation weighed heavily on Alrone as Shower turned the only constant partner in her isolated existence. Encircled by the silent forest, she kept enduring each hard day lacking family or shelter. Irritation gradually built inside her because existence carried unceasing struggle instead of happiness or comfort. Holding the red lifted softly, Alrone wished she at least had somebody alongside her. Distant away, the youthful witch considered about Alrone too, hoping one day they could share their burdens jointly. Irritation overwhelmed Alrone after realizing the lovely lifted sampled no different once her plant body digested it. Testing her fresh skills, she casually dragged multiple tendrils upward from beneath the ground nearby. Surprise instantly scattered across her face after noticing one shifting tendril was actually a snake instead. Before Alrone could react correctly, the hungry snake lunged straight toward her blossom body. Panicking once anew, Alrone frantically attempted escaping as questioning why monsters constantly targeted her. Alrone formed spiked tendrils and snared a huge snake before it escaped. The creature fought on the earth, but the keen thorns gripped its slippery body tightly. After remaining the fight, she combined lifted thorns with her tendrils to shape stronger weapons. Shortly, a group of wild swine hurried through the forest toward her spot. Floating above the earth, Alrone hit swiftly and pierced the rushing animals with her reinforced vines. After defeating multiple creatures, Alrone spotted the forest growing more deadly each day. The disappearance of one apocalypse creature disrupted the balance, causing frailer beasts to roam frantically. She remembered the frightening rulers of the forest and recognized how mighty they genuinely were. Even with her fresh power, Alrone understood battling Papa Ursine would still be extremely difficult. Resolved to endure the coming chaos, she chose to turn tougher and protect her peaceful life. A month passed after Alrone's initial clash with Papa Ursine, and the forest eventually turned quieter. Abruptly, two big Ursine creatures emerged together and charged straight toward her nest. Their attacks drained her sap swiftly, causing Alrone understand prolonged battling would weaken her body. Incapable to halt pair foes at once, she sought for a smarter way to survive. Alrone targeted the smaller female Ursine initial, hoping to distinct the pair amid the fight. Alrone emitted sugary sap to lure the smaller Ursine away from its partner. The female Ursine swiftly spotted the aroma and hurried toward the floating drops. Meanwhile, the bigger Ursine bellowed furiously after realizing the diversion. Alrone steadily observed the separated foe near her readied hunting ground. Once the moment was ideal, spiked tendrils erupted from the earth to trap the charging bear. Spiked tendrils erupted from the earth and smashed into the snared female bear. The creature fought brutally, but the tightening tendrils kept restricting its movements. Alrone scattered toxic spores through the thorns, weakening the Ursine as toxins stepped in its body. As the smaller foe suffered, Papa Ursine charged forward in fury toward her spot. Lacking retreating, Alrone faced the raging animal straight and readied for a final fight against the forest ruler. Papa Ursine collided through the spiked tendrils and compelled its way toward Alrone. More tendrils encircled the huge animal, attempting to hold its weighty body in place. Despite the restraints, the furious creature maintained tearing through the keen bindings. Alrone observed anxiously as the mighty beast snapped apart. Another wave of tendrils. Realizing normal attacks were faltering, she swiftly fired hardened kernels to slow Papa Bear's advance. Alrone readied multiple fruit, like traps covered with concentrated sap and deadly pollen. She hurled the unusual produce toward Papa Ursine as the raging beast rushed closer. The hungry creature gulped the bait one after another, lacking noticing the concealed toxin. Even after consuming numerous traps, Papa Ursine kept rushing with frightening strength. Although impressed by the animal's endurance, Alrone maintained assailing as the toxin slowly weakened its massive body. Papa Ursine ignored the toxin and kept advancing straight toward Alrone's blossom nest. Keen spiked tendrils shot across the battleground and attempted to block the huge beast again. Although the attack slowed its motions, Papa Ursine still compelled its method nearer to her. Alrone stayed composed because she had spent a whole month preparing for this fight. After observing the exhausted creature cautiously, she disclosed another nectar-filled orb to keep weakening Papa Bear. After months of preparation, Alrone disclosed a orb covered with highly concentrated toxin. Unlike the earlier sap bait, this deadly ensnare was formed solely to beat Papa Ursine. Lacking reluctance, the exhausted animal gulped the orb while pressing forward aggressively. Shortly later, its enormous body started slowing as the toxin spread through its system. Incapable to resist any longer, Papa Ursine eventually collapsed before Alrone's blossom den. Papa Ursine staggered heavily close Alrone's den as the toxin kept weakening its body. A little orb slipped onto the earth, causing Alrone concern the monster noticed her trap. Instead of assailing instantly, the exhausted animal leaned nearer and coated her with thick saliva,
Feeling restless, Alron observed cautiously as the huge creature struggled to remain standing. At last, Papa Ursine misplaced its balance entirely and collided onto the earth beside her flower nest. After the intense fight, Papa Ursine eventually collapsed alongside Alron's flower nest. Sweat coated her face as she understood the mighty forest lord had genuinely fallen. Despite calling herself a normal Alron, she recognized how far tougher she had turned. With the great creatures beaten, Alron silently embraced her fresh position as ruler of the forest. Alron felt motion nearby as multiple insects hurried through the forest toward her flower nest. Terror scattered across her face after recognizing the remaining insects returning at filled speed. Reassurance replaced her alarm when the beasts collected calmly around her enormous petals. Sugary sap trickled from the plants as feeble bees accepted the gift and recovered nearby. Shortly, Alron confidently intended to fortify the forest guardians, shielding her territory from future danger. A little avian circled above Alron before dropping a blossom close her huge petals. Bewilderment covered her mind after the unusual beast returned with another blossom she failed to catch. Silently, Alron inspected the blossom as observing the bird continue flying around the forest. Suspicion grew as she questioned whether the avian was mocking her by collecting useless blossoms. Meanwhile, the enigmatic avian steadily soared away, causing Alron curious about its strange behavior. Cold season reached across the forest, causing Alron to lose sunshine and ordeal locating enough food. Isolation gradually overwhelmed her after the insects vanished into their hives for the chilly season. Only, the unusual white avian kept visiting her blossom den during the quiet winter days. Abruptly, nearby, avians covered the forest with booming chirping as Alron listened carefully in confusion. After considering strongly, Alron understood the white avian never sang like the others encircling the forest. Alron silently gawked at the white avian as the nervous beast avoided looking directly at her. Boredom shoved her into talking openly, despite knowing the avian could not understand her ideas. Surprisingly, the white avian replied with the unusual chirping noise that startled Alron immediately. Its harsh speech sounded awkward and unrefined, causing Alron wonder how the avian endured singing like that. Still, compassion gradually grew inside her because pair of them fought conveying themselves properly in the forest. Alron spotted the white avian responding to her speech and turned inquisitive about its understanding. After the avian soared away, isolation silently covered her forest home as she hoped for another visit. Frost reached the next day as another white guest emerged near the trees. Terror scattered through Alron's mind as she understood cold season could make her lose her leaves. She earnestly sought for a method to endure the chilly season without shedding herself bare. Alron understood cold season would shortly depart the forest vacant of animals and food for her survival. As considering cautiously, she rotated toward the white avian and formed a desperate plan in her mind. Alron collected her courage and questioned the avian to cause her a unique flower. Believing winter-resistant blossoms lived someplace nearby. She depended on the avian because she could not travel herself. Lacking causing a noise, the white avian soared away as Alron quietly waited for the next day. The blossom carried by the white avian aided Alron endure the chilly, giving her hope for surviving winter. Weighty frost abruptly coated the forest and covered the land beneath thick white layers. Although the chilly no longer terrified her, the immense snowfall formed a deadly new problem. Frost kept piling over Alron until she understood she could neither breathe nor photosynthesize correctly. Snared beneath the frost, Alron recognized too late that escaping by herself had turned impossible. Covered beneath the frost, Alron gradually misplaced hope and wished to fall asleep forever. Before her consciousness faded, a youthful maiden abruptly emerged and started digging through the heavy snow. The maiden cautiously uncovered Alron as refusing to ignore the suffering plant concealed below the tempest. After returning multiple times, the maiden readied a solution to aid Alron endure the harsh winter. Believing the unusual plant could adapt, the maiden presented unique nourishment that might let Alron melt the snow herself. The isolated maiden vowed to guard Alron as shielding her carefully from the endless snowfall. Seeing their comparable isolation, the maiden gradually shaped a deep attachment toward the abandoned plant creature. Before causing, she vowed to return anew and keep caring for Alron through the cold season. After the maiden vanished into the frost, Alron silently stayed alone inside the frozen forest once more. Later, Alron spotted the frost around her had already been removed away by somebody nearby. The white avian returned bearing an unusual skunk cabbage that instantly caught Alron's attention. After consuming the plant, heat scattered through Alron and gradually dissolved the heavy snow surrounding her body. Melting frost eventually reached her rootlets, allowing Alron to recover power and endure the freezing weather. As observing the avian fly nearby, Alron questioned who had genuinely cleared the snow around her. Although the answer stayed unknown, Alron gratefully embraced that somebody had rescued her existence in the winter forest.
Alrone appreciated the white avian for aiding her through cold season and vowed not to harm it anymore. Meanwhile, the isolated maiden cheerfully returned dwelling, hoping Alrone would someday understand her kindness. Outside the snowy home, the shovel lay silently after being employed to clear the weighty snow. As cold season gradually feebled, Alrone waited calmly for the coming spring alongside the melting snow. Sunshine eventually reached the forest anew, turning the frozen ground back into a paradise for plants. An unusual snapping noise reverberated through the forest as a fresh chapter quietly began around Alrone. Nearby, a big beast shifted between the timber as eerie laughter spread across the dark forest path. Meanwhile, Alrone cheerfully spent time jointly with the forest lilies and their growing partners. Joyful laughter covered the blossom grove as insects and minute creatures gathered around Alrone's nest. Shortly, lovely moths reached in the forest, becoming the newest guests welcomed into Alrone's tranquil territory. Alrone cautiously examined the graceful moth leading the newly reached group around her flower nest. Interest scattered among the moths as they gradually fluttered nearer toward the giant plant monster. Lacking reluctance, Alrone cautioned the minute beasts that approaching too closely could end with them being eaten. Abruptly, a booming snapping sound reverberated across the forest and interrupted the cheerful gathering nearby. Instants later, weighty impacts and breaking timber disclosed that something deadly was moving through the forest. Alarm scattered across Alrone's face after the deadly existence eventually emerged near her peaceful forest. Shortly, a heavily equipped minotaur stepped forward from the timber as bearing a massive battle axe. Cautiously, Alrone recalled that minotaurs were intelligent demons capable of employing pair power and magic. Realizing the foe functioned the demon force, she swiftly readied to protect the bees and butterflies nearby. Tension covered the glade as Alrone and the Minotaur faced each other before the fight started. Alrone questioned why a follower of the demon ruler abruptly emerged within her tranquil forest territory. Resolve covered her mind as recollections of battling demons amid her past life returned, once again. Lacking reluctance, the Minotaur charged forward as Alrone employed her tendrils to block his advance. Mighty swings from the demon fighter splintered multiple tendrils and pushed through her defenses easily. Realization swiftly hit Alrone after discovering her attacks could not pierce the Minotaur's weighty armor. The plated Minotaur charged straight toward Alrone as preparing another mighty assault with his massive axe. Swiftly, Alrone emitted a toxic cloud and compelled the demon fighter to defend himself carefully. However, she understood the Minotaur would finally need to deeper his arm as continuing the assault. Taking benefit of the gap, Alrone fired a sudden assault directly toward the approaching enemy. Surprise scattered across the Minotaur's face after Alrone's plan eventually disrupted his motions during battle. Enthusiasm emerged on Alrone's face after her assault effectively compelled the Minotaur to lose control briefly. Surprisingly, the demon fighter gulped the unusual fluid before the poison could weaken his body further. Surprise instantly hit Alrone after realizing the Minotaur bore a remedy to counter her poison. Lacking wasting time, the plated demon resumed assailing as smashing through her tendrils once again. Confident steps reverberated across the battleground as the healing Minotaur progressed toward Alrone aggressively. Unusual blossom beast abruptly emerged beside the Minotaur and released poison at close range. Meanwhile, Alrone understood her botanical creations could produce toxic attacks mighty sufficient to overwhelm enemies directly. Instants later, the Minotaur collapsed onto the earth after the toxin entirely overcame his body. Reassured by her triumph, Alrone sought through the deceased demon's belongings for anything peculiar or dangerous. Bewilderment scattered across her face after discovering elixirs and a suspicious picture of an unknown person girl. Alrone questioned the unusual picture and questioned why the demon force targeted an aged person woman. Before she could think farther, a whole squad of demons abruptly reached inside the forest clearing. Instead of panicking, Alrone steadily readied herself for another deadly fight against the invaders. Multiple minotaurs encircled her blossom den as the surviving demons gathered behind their injured companion. Tension swiftly returned as the demon warriors gawked at Alrone like prey standing before hungry predators. One of the minotaurs abruptly coated his arm with fire and disclosed the ability to use fire magic. Surprise instantly scattered across Alrone's face after realizing the demons held powers deadly against plants. Encircled by fire, Alrone fought to think of a method to endure the deadly situation. Meanwhile, the demon warriors accused her of slaying one of their comrades amid the earlier fight. The plated Minotaur then demanded Alrone's submission calmly or face being scorched living by the troop. Bewilderment overwhelmed Alrone after the demons demanded her submission and noted harvesting her precious sap. Terror gradually grew inside her as imagining a coming spent dwelling only as the demon's captive producer. Meanwhile, doubt covered the battleground as Alrone fought to choose between resistance and surrender. Abruptly, the moths and insects hurried forward jointly, surrounding Alrone as if protecting their forest master. Surprise scattered across her face after realizing the minute beasts willingly stood alongside her against the demons. Alrone concerned about the insects and moths risking their existences against the demons' deadly fire attacks. Tears shaped in her eyes after realizing the minute beasts still returned to guard and salvation her. Meanwhile, one fearless moth fired an assault straight against the plated minotaur without hesitation. Resolve replaced Alrone's terror as she readied herself to combat jointly with her loyal companions. Fight cries shortly reverberated through the forest as Alrone and the cluster charged toward the demon troop together. Deep inside the forest, an peculiar assembly started under a sole, ruthless rule. Only the last one left over would win. Alrone observed cautiously as terrified plant beasts encircled her, sensing danger spreading through the peaceful woods. Not long after, equipped demon warriors marched into the forest as seeking for something beyond the region. Seeing the insignia on their helmets, Alrone understood they belonged to the demon force and planned to seize her living. A deus of the nearby village crossed her mind, yet retreat no longer seemed possible. Understanding the threat advancing the forest, Alrone readied herself to combat against the advancing foes. As the foe neared farther into the forest, Alrone fired toxic spores across the battlefield and slowed the soldiers immediately. Lacking reluctance, innumerable bee-like beasts hurried from above and attacked the invading army from every direction. The cluster divided into bands, immense the puzzled foes through sheer numbers and constant movement. Among the beasts, the exalted moth scattered shining scales through the sky while supporting the forest's defense. Shortly, the minotaurs misplaced control of their bodies as hallucinations and freezing effects scattered across the battleground, allowing Alrone's forces to dominate the combat completely. Alrone's forest companions kept pushing the foe back as the leftover soldiers desperately searched for an opening to attack. Abruptly, keen tendrils erupted from the earth and blocked a direct strike aimed toward the butterfly queen. The battleground swiftly rotated chaotic as swarms of bugs and twisting tendrils surrounded the lone minotaur warrior. Realizing the foes concentrated fully on her, Alrone steadily stepped forward and drew the fighter's attention away from her allies. Pair sides charged at the same instant, but the Minotaur's weighty blade sliced through multiple tendrils before reaching Alrone's position. The Minotaur's arm abruptly emitted fire, blazing through several vines and forcing Alrone to retreat slightly. Fire scattered swiftly across the battleground as the fighter kept advancing toward Alrone without hesitation. Observing her tendrils burn apart, Alrone swiftly understood the foe possessed abilities capable of countering her attacks. Although alarm momentarily crossed her mind, she sought for a method to extinguish the fire before the forest suffered greater damage. Before Alrone could answer, the foe encircled her and announced she would be seized alive instead of being killed immediately. Even as encircled, Alrone rejected the foe's demand to turn their servant or source of nectar. After seeing the fire scattered farther, she chose the invading minotaurs would be taken down beside the burning battlefield if necessary. A mighty shockwave erupted through the forest as Alrone emitted her tendrils toward each enemy nearby at once. The assailing warriors were swiftly bound, their motions completely halted as the vines tightened around their bodies. Struggling to flee, the snared minotaurs gradually misplaced power while Alrone maintained control over the battlefield despite her exhaustion. The bound Minotaur warriors were hit continually by Alrone's companions while remaining trapped inside the tightening vines. One remaining fighter abruptly unleashed an enormous eruption of flames, forcing Alrone and her companions to retreat backward. Walls of fire swiftly encircled the battleground, cutting through tendrils and blocking the toxin spreading across the area. Alrone understood her attacks were becoming ineffective as the fire steadily scorched nearer toward her main body. With the fire continuing to scatter and her options disappearing, Alrone frantically sought for any technique capable of stopping the advancing foe. As observing the blazing battleground, Alrone abruptly recalled the Minotaur who previously struck her with a flaming weapon. Realizing the source of the fire, she swiftly employed her tendrils to snatch the fighter's hatchet away from him. Although unknown with arms, Alrone chose to wield the seized hatchet herself as the flames continued spreading nearby. Her companions fought to hold the leftover foes back, buying precious time as she prepared a desperate counterattack. At that instant, Alrone spotted one deceased Minotaur bearing an unknown object, causing her attention to shift immediately. Alrone abruptly spotted the leftover Minotaur, losing control as exhaustion and toxin eventually affected his body. Even so, the fighter bellowed intensely and kept swinging his blazing weapon while surrounded by the collapsing battlefield. Around him, numerous forest beasts lay wounded after enduring the fire and brutal attacks throughout the battle.
Seeing her companions fall one after another, Alron silently resolved to beat the final foe herself before more existences were lost. Just as the Minotaur charged forward anew, a big splash hit his body surprisingly and disrupted his attack at the last moment. Alron uncovered multiple elixirs, closed the trembling Minotaur, and understood they once belonged to his fallen companions. After noticing one bottle contained in remedy, she recognized the foe still had protection against toxin and paralysis effects. Before the fighter could recover, Alron crushed the leftover bottles with her tendrils and removed his final benefit. Remembering the plants bore by the Minotaurs, she linked them to the unusual elixirs used throughout the battle. Shortly later, Alron assimilated the plants into her body and emitted stronger sleep and paralysis particles across the burning battlefield. Despite the toxin scattering through his body, the leftover Minotaur formed another ring of fire and continued fighting stubbornly. Alron reacted swiftly and hurled the seized hatchet toward the foe as controlling it with her vines. The fighter blocked the assault instantly, but the impact compelled him to lose balance for a brief instant. As the fire shifted around the battleground, Alron cautiously observed the Minotaur's motions and searched for another weakness. Sweat coated the fighter's face as the toxin gradually affected his vision, causing his body to tremble uncontrollably amid the fight. Alron covertly wrapped the hatchet handle with toxic spiked tendrils before sending the weapon back toward the Minotaur. As the fighter seized the hatchet anew, the concealed thorns pierced his hand and spread paralysis through his body. Instants later, the exhausted Minotaur collapsed under the combined effects of toxin, paralysis, and continuous injuries from the fight. As fading in and out of consciousness, the beaten fighter silently recalled his leader and regretted failing his mission. Abruptly, fire erupted brutally from the Minotaur's arm, causing Alron to freeze in surprise as the battleground shook once more. The beaten Minotaur abruptly set his own body ablaze after realizing he could no longer flee Alron's control. Instants later, the blazing fighter collapsed onto the earth as flames spread rapidly across the surrounding area. Fire shortly reached the nearby timber, forcing Alron to watch powerlessly as the forest started blazing around her. Overcome by terror and exhaustion, Alron gawked at the growing fire and questioned whether she and the forest would survive the disaster. As the forest scorched outside, Alron remembered agonizing recollections linked to fear and confinement from her previous life. Long ago, terrified villagers accused the youthful maiden of being a deadly creature after witnessing her strange abilities. Incapable to defend herself, she was bound and confined away as the individuals around her treated her with hatred. Back in the present, Alron quietly observed the raging fire scattered farther across the forest she guarded. Haze and fire devoured the encircling timber rapidly, leaving Alron overwhelmed as the disaster continued growing beyond control. Knowing she could not flee the scattering fire, Alron chose to stay behind as urging her forest companions to flee safely. After settling herself, she sought frantically for a technique capable of stopping the fire before the whole forest disappeared. Shortly, Alron hurried farther into the blazing region and prepared to carry out a risky plan using her vines. She forcefully uprooted nearby timber and dragged them nearer jointly, hoping the advancing fire would lose space to spread further. Whenever her tendrils caught fire, Alron instantly severed the blazing sections and kept shielding the forest alone. Exhausted from controlling innumerable tendrils, Alron understood very small well vegetation remained around her after the fire spread. Blazing debris shortly soared through the sky, forcing her to stay alert as continuing to manage the dangerous flames nearby. One by one, the blazing timber collapsed into blackened charcoal as the forest suffered weighty destruction from the fight. After stopping the fire from scattering farther, Alron eventually relaxed mildly and recognized she had narrowly survived the disaster herself. Just as the forest turned silent anew, Alron abruptly felt another presence approaching from deeper within the woods. As healing from exhaustion, Alron abruptly felt motion somewhere deeper within the damaged forest. Shortly later, she spotted another remaining Minotaur swiftly fleeing through the timber and away from the battlefield. Resolved not to let the foe flee, Alron instantly fired her vines toward the retreating soldier. Despite her efforts, the leftover Minotaur vanished into the dense forest before she could seize him. Incapable to keep chasing due to her feeble state, Alron instead concentrated on understanding why the demon army had entered her forest. As recalling her earlier as a saint, Alron recalled the stronghold town that once guarded humanity from the demon army. After the remaining Minotaur fled, she concerned the nearby town might already be facing threat from invading demons. Although the fight had finished, Alron silently wished she would never encounter the demon force again in the future. Shortly later, she returned farther into the forest beside the leftover forest creatures that survived the devastating fire. Standing before the graves of deceased partners, Alron expressed thanks toward those who fought alongside her until the finish. Following the interment of the deceased forest beasts, Alrone expressed thanks toward the surviving ones who remained by her side. Around her, the remaining creatures gradually collected once more, displaying that life still continued within the damaged forest. With the others finally returning to their homes, a deep sense of isolation silently settled over Alrone. Amid the tranquil silence, ideas of the enigmatic white avian suddenly crossed her mind again after its long absence. Gazing back on their earlier encounters, Alrone eventually recognized how far she cared about the bird and worried she might never meet it again. An uneasy feeling kept growing inside Alrone as ideas of the missing white avian covered her mind again. Imagining its return, she cheerfully pictured herself practicing songs jointly with the unusual avian once more. Meanwhile, agonizing recollections from her prior person existence resurfaced, reminding her of the day villagers condemned her as a witch. Crowds collected beside warriors and mages from remote places to witness the public punishment readied for her execution. Just before the sentence could be bore out, bewilderment abruptly scattered through the crowd after an unusual disturbance appeared overhead. Abruptly, 2 blazing suns emerged in the heavens and coated the whole area with overwhelming heat and light. Staring upward in surprise, the youthful maiden could not understand why a second star had emerged above the world. Terror swiftly scattered through the village as warriors and civilians freaked while the burning lights drew closer overhead. Distant away in the forest, Alrone instantly identified the unusual phenomenon and understood something terrible was happening again. Lacking reluctance, the imprisoned maiden chose to aid Alrone, believing the plant monster remained precious to her despite everything. Lacking warning, the imprisoned maiden leapt earlier the warriors and fled from the execution grounds in a desperate rush. After landing securely close the forest, she instantly kept rushing while guards shouted and searched for the fleeing witch. Around her, timber started snapping apart as the severe warmth from the twin suns spread deeper across the area. Learning a sudden sound nearby, the maiden swiftly rotated toward the sky and noticed a dangerous light approaching rapidly. Instants later, gigantic fire collided down from above and devoured part of the forest before her eyes. Explosions and severe warmth kept tearing through the forest as the unusual twin suns scorched overhead. As sturdy winds scattered across the battleground, Alrone fought to understand the terrifying disaster surrounding her. An enormous worm emerged from the fire and descended upon the devastated forest with immense existence. Alrone silently lay within the big blossoms when a strange warmth suddenly spread across her body. Sweat shaped as the warmth swiftly intensified, causing the tranquil spring air feel unusually dangerous around the forest. After raising her eyes toward the heavens, she froze upon seeing a second blazing star shining alongside the initial. Surprise gradually rotated into terror when one of the suns started drifting unnaturally through the clouds above her. Lacking warning, an enormous flash erupted across the horizon, covering the forest and Alrone beneath immense white light. As the frightening phenomenon eventually descended upon the world, Alrone gawked toward the heavens as the unusual warmth continued spreading across the forest around her. Recollections shortly returned as she remembered witnessing the same enigmatic light amid the previous summer near the white bird. That shining existence had once crossed the heavens like an enormous beast shaped entirely from blazing flames. Realization gradually settled within her mind after the forest temperature started lifting precisely like it had before. Abruptly, the gigantic fiery being descended from above and collided brutally into the forest, shaking the whole area beneath Alrone. A gigantic flaming figure descended above the forest as severe light scattered through the heavens behind the timber. Instants later, the blazing beast emitted a brutal burst of energy that shook the surrounding area heavily. Alrone swiftly shifted through the raging fire as her monstrous blossom body protected her from the destruction below. Careful inspection shortly disclosed the fire was unnatural and bore the immense presence of advanced magical power. Despite her earlier experience as a saint, Alrone understood she had never encountered magic capable of causing devastation on such a frightening scale. Alrone spotted a blazing figure snared within the raging fire as desperate cries echoed across the devastated forest. Lacking reluctance, she shifted her enormous blossom body forward and swallowed the injured figure before the flames consumed everything nearby. Burn marks coated the unconscious individual as dense fluid from Alrone's plant body gradually cooled the severe injuries. Abruptly, barrels of water collided down from above, extinguishing parts of the fire encircling the damaged forest region. Reassurance scattered across Alrone's mind after spotting the known white avian soaring overhead during the dangerous disaster once again. The white avian returned bearing a weighty bucket of water as Alrone observed the strange rescue with gratitude. Bewilderment swiftly crossed her mind after realizing a normal avian should never possess sufficient strength for such actions. Recollections resurfaced as Alrone remembered learning an enigmatic speech during one of the bird's previous visits long ago.
Shortly later, the white avian cautioned her about advancing danger and urged her to hide immediately within the forest. Alarm scattered across Alron's face after the avian hurriedly cautioned that the frightening fiery beast was already coming closer toward her location. Surprise overwhelmed Alron after learning the white avian abruptly screamed warnings straight toward her without hesitation. Disbelief coated her face as the avian openly spoke as apologizing for keeping its secret concealed until now. The enigmatic avian then disclosed the frightening fire were connected to the approaching demon army threatening the forest. Understanding the threat, the avian attempted guiding Alron away because her gigantic blossom body stayed impossible to transport safely. As listening cautiously, Alron eventually understood the white avian had always been the unknown, being repeatedly rescuing her throughout previous disasters. A brutal tremor abruptly shook the forest as Alron and the white avian froze from the advancing danger. Booming, snapping noises reverberated nearby as something enormous moved through the burning forest toward their location rapidly. Terror scattered across Alron's face after realizing the frightening beast was drawing nearer with every passing moment. Despite the warning, she steadily assured the white avian she could still hide securely before the foe reached. Instants later, the white avian swiftly soared away as Alron prepared herself alone within the enormous flower body hidden inside the forest. The white avian disclosed its true shape as a youthful maiden before quickly flying back into the smoky sky. Before causing, the enigmatic maiden vowed Alron she would return with more water and pleaded her to survive. After becoming solitary anew, Alron instantly scattered multiple vines underground while preparing herself for the approaching threat. Limited time compelled her to form only basic defenses as the blazing forest kept shaking from remote destruction nearby. Instants later, innumerable tendrils wrapped firmly around Alron's enormous flower body, forming a protective cocoon to shield her from the coming attack. Concealed inside the tendril cocoon, Alron stayed motionless as hoping her gigantic body would resemble an ordinary plant. Weighty steps shortly reverberated across the forest floor, causing terror to spread through her mind as something approached nearby. Recollections of defeating a demon general resurfaced, reminding Alron how close she once originated to dying amid fight. Even so, she recognized the frightening beast outside held immense power far beyond any enemy she previously encountered. At last, the blazing creature disclosed itself before the blazing forest, and Alron understood the horrifying being was an enormous flame dragon. Enormous steps halted close Alron's concealing place, causing the ground and surrounding trees to tremble violently. Inside the cocoon, she cautiously lowered herself farther into the huge blossom as trying to remain completely unnoticed. Terror overwhelmed her body as the gigantic worm kept shifting closer toward the concealed plant shelter above the forest floor. Desperation covered Alron's ideas as she quietly prayed for the frightening creature to pass without discovering her location. Sadly, the flame worm abruptly spoke her name straight, causing Alron realize her hiding attempt had already completely failed. The flame worm gawked straight toward Alron's concealing location after effortlessly sensing her presence within the vine cocoon. Trembling with terror, Alron gradually emerged from the huge blossom as realizing escape was no longer possible anymore. Instead of assailing instantly, the gigantic worm cautiously observed her appearance and approached with unexpected interest across the burning forest. Aged recollections returned to Alron as she remembered resisting foes amid her painful life serving as a nectar source. Facing the gigantic flameworm now, however, she understood all confidence and battling spirit had entirely disappeared from her heart. The worm gradually neared her blossom body as becoming deeply interested in the unusual scent surrounding Alron's presence. Bewilderment scattered across Alron's face after the beast identified the nectar, like tears dropping from her frightened eyes. Lacking warning, the flameworm abruptly lowered its enormous head and extended its liquor toward Alron with dangerous curiosity. Alron spotted the flameworm's blazing saliva melting the earth as listening to his unexpected explanation carefully. Hope momentarily emerged within her mind after believing the worm only planned passing through the forest calmly. That hope vanished instantly when the worm accused Alron of slaying multiple minotaurs serving under his command. Bewilderment scattered across her face after discovering one remaining minotaur had fled earlier and reported the entire incident. The flameworm then revealed each fact he already understood, leaving Alron unable to deny what happened before his arrival. Alron clarified the Minotaurs had attempted capturing her for a botanical grove before she fought back against them. The flameworm then recited each deceased Minotaur's name, proving he strongly recalled each subordinate under his command. Although disappointed by their defeat, the worm still announced their deaths unforgivable and chose Alron deserved execution. Terrified by the advancing fire, Alron frantically pleaded for mercy and presented her nectar before the dragon attacked.
As maintaining a composed look, she covertly intended surviving long enough to poison, manipulate, or eventually escape from the powerful dragon. Alrone anxiously presented her sap as the flame worm carefully tasted it and observed her frightened reaction closely. Amazement crossed the worm's face after discovering the sap held an unusually sugary and delicate flavor unlike anything before. Although interested in keeping Alrone nearby for her sap, the worm still weighed her personality distant, too deadly and violent. The conversation shortly shifted after the worm demanded an explanation regarding the missing corpses of his deceased Minotaur followers. Feeling pressured, Alrone acknowledged burying the bodies as stating she could not devour their armor and belongings at all. Suspicion grew within the flame worm after noticing Alrone's carnivorous blossom body emerged unusually well. Fed recently, pressured by the interrogation, Alrone justified herself by stating she only pursued creatures necessary for her survival. The worm then disclosed traces of his deceased Minotaur followers still stayed within the magical flames surrounding his body. Surprise scattered across Alrone's face after her monstrous blossom abruptly reacted brutally toward the lingering scent of burned flesh nearby. Before she could act farther, the flame worm steadily cautioned that normal water would never extinguish the magical fire covering the battlefield. The flame worm announced Alrone's demise inevitable, and abandoned the blazing forest behind him. Mystical fire swiftly encircled her gigantic flower body while smoke covered the sky above the forest. Alarm scattered through Alrone's mind after realizing neither she nor the forest could flee the growing inferno. Across the encircling ground, blazing firestorms kept descending and reduced innumerable timber into ashes beneath overwhelming heat. Even as accepting her grim fate, Alrone bitterly regretted losing the tranquil existence she had eventually obtained after enduring unceasing hardships. Resolve returned to Alrone as she rejected accepting demise as the mystical flames continued destroying the forest around her. Frightening recollections of her earlier demise resurfaced, strengthening her urgent desire to survive no matter the cost. Abruptly, a little kernel hit her body, causing Alrone confused about where the strange object originated from. Careful inspection recalled her of Banksia plants she once studied long ago amid her prior person life. Unlike normal plants, Banksia kernels required severe warmth to scatter, inspiring Alrone to consider escaping the fire by transforming herself into a seed. A dangerous notion shaped within Alrone's mind after remembering some plants could propagate through self-pollination methods. Knowledge obtained from consuming numerous plant kind convinced her she might form kernels carrying her own genetic traits. Although unsure whether the procedure would work, Alrone embraced the risk rather than waiting helplessly for death. Careful reasoning led her to believe her consciousness might stay linked to the blossom's pistil and coming kernels. Even if her recollections vanished entirely, Alrone still wished the newborn plant kid would continue living peacefully in her place. With demise advancing swiftly, Alrone eventually chose to begin the dangerous self-pollination process immediately. Shining stamina scattered throughout her blossom body as the unusual transformation slowly advanced beyond her expectations. Weakness shortly overwhelmed Alrone, and her fading consciousness formed it hard to stay aware of her surroundings. Pieces of earlier recollections resurfaced as she questioned whether her next life would still remember her former identities. As her awareness vanished entirely, Alrone silently wished for nothing more than a tranquil existence spent dwelling calmly as a plant. A soul shining kernel endured within the blazing forest after Alrone's consciousness completely disappeared during the transformation. Aunt's awareness gradually returned. She identified the ruined surroundings and understood she had endured the disaster effectively. Reassurance overwhelmed Alrone after confirming her recollections, and Blossom body still stayed intact after reincarnating again. Enthusiasm swiftly replaced terror as she rejoiced overcoming the deadly fire that nearly destroyed both herself and the forest. Instants later, bewilderment hit Alrone after noticing her body had turned extremely little and immature following her rebirth from the seed. Minute Alrone frantically sought for water as struggling to endure within the burned and dried forest. Abruptly, the enigmatic maiden who previously emerged alongside the white bird descended from the sky toward her location. Alrone inspected the minute-floating maiden who abruptly emerged before her without any warning. Upward above the earth, the white-haired kid steadily drifted through the sky while observing Alrone from a distance. Bewilderment covered Alrone's mind after noticing the black robe and unknown look encircling the strange visitor. Uneasiness gradually grew when Alrone weighed the possibility that the enigmatic maiden might have connections with demons or aggressive forces nearby. Recollections of deadly encounters returned as her tendrils instinctively shifted around her body. After gazing nearer, Alrone eventually recognized why the kid could not recognize her anymore. Her present look as a little plant creature no longer resembled the saint she employed to be before reincarnation changed her entire life.
Alrone observed the little figure depart as bewilderment lingered across her face. A white avian abruptly emerged in the heavens, floating strangely above the remote field without moving its wings. Reassurance reached Alrone after realizing the beast was living, though its unnatural motion kept to trouble her thoughts. The avian swiftly collided into a wooden barrel nearby, causing Alrone to apologize after admitting she had concealed the truth earlier. Dark stamina scattered through the sky as the white-haired maiden descended once anew, staring seriously toward Alrone while her long hair and cloak moved around her body. Surprise coated Alrone's face after the floating white avian abruptly changed into a young girl before her eyes. The enigmatic kid clarified that the person look was actually her true form, though she denied being an ordinary human. Alrone turned alarmed after discovering the maiden was a witch, a deadly existence feared across the kingdom. Aged recollections from Alrone's earlier existence as a saint resurfaced, reminding her how the church taught hostility toward witches and their corrupted magic. Despite the warnings in her recollections, Alrone compelled herself to stay composed. After realizing the witch standing nearby had not shown any hostility toward her, the witch silently clarified that she was initially a normal person who later became a witch after losing her parents at a young age. Although Alrone fought to understand the account, she felt the maiden was talking honestly about her past. Terror abruptly stepped in Alrone's mind after recalling stories about witches employing scarce creatures and plants as potion ingredients. The witch swiftly turned startled when Alrone noted their initial meeting amid a battle against wild monkeys nearby. Interest finally carried the witch back to see anew because Alrone's strength and unusual beauty left a strong impression on her memories. The youthful witch abruptly questioned Alrone to pertain to her, causing the plant monster completely stunned by the unexpected request. Alarm swiftly crossed Alrone's mind after learning the witch say she desired to raise and attention for her personally, despite hating people. The witch acknowledged she reliable Alrone because pair of them were creatures rejected by society. The witch then disclosed she had covertly guarded Alrone for an whole year by bringing water, blossoms, and support whenever danger appeared nearby. After stating all earnestly, the witch assuredly announced that Alrone already belonged beside her long before this meeting happened again. Alrone confidently rejected to turn anyone's property, even after recognizing how far aid the young witch had given her. The witch steadily presented water as once anew, asking Alrone to accept being cared for under her protection. Irritation instantly scattered through Alrone after realizing the witch cleverly employed her need for water to persuade her. As observing the witch transport the weighty bucket, Alrone spotted painful burn marks covering the girl's hands from past dangers. Aged recollections gradually returned as Alrone recalled the white avian repeatedly risking herself to protect and support her throughout the previous year. The isolated witch acknowledged she no longer desired to stay solitary and wished to live beside someone she could trust. After struggling with her emotions, the witch admitted that Alrone was the initial individual who originated to mind during her loneliness. Learning those words made Alrone to recall the agony of betrayal and isolation from her past and present lives. Recollections from her earlier person existence resurfaced, reminding Alrone how remote she once felt from the people surrounding her after reincarnation. Although her second existence placed her among numerous others, the isolation inside her heart never entirely vanished through the passing years. Agonizing recollections of betrayal returned as Alrone acknowledged how frantically she desired someone to stay beside her during the lonely past year. The youthful witch admitted that Alrone had turned the most crucial existence in her world, despite being a plant creature. After years of isolation, the witch disclosed she had already abandoned hope of ever being required by anyone anew. Alrone eventually understood that rejecting the witch would only depart pair of them snared in endless loneliness and distrust. With silent resolve, Alrone gradually reached her tendrils forward, quietly accepting the witch's wish to remain together from then onward. Alrone unfolded her arms toward the youthful witch, eventually accepting the bond they had pair longed for. After settling down, Alrone curiously questioned what name she should use when talking to her fresh partner from now on. The witch cautiously lifted Alrone into a wooden bucket, allowing the plant creature to shift more readily across the region. Awkwardness mixed with happiness as Alrone settled inside the pot as the witch confidently respected how well it suited her look. Their tranquil instant swiftly shifted after the witch disclosed that a demon force had started searching the surrounding region for unknown reasons. After discovering the demon force was seeking for the witch, Alrone consented that concealing deep inside the forest would be the safest decision. The youthful witch changed back into her white avian shape, stating that traveling this way attracted less attention from enemies nearby. Alrone listened cautiously as the witch recorded how her unusual magic permitted her to float through the air and change forms freely. Lacking wasting more time, the white avian abruptly touched down on Alrone's bucket and readied to guide their journey forward together. Bore through the open heavens, Alrone silently left her aged dwelling behind as the forest slowly approached in the distance. As soaring across the ruined ground, Alron eventually recognized how devastating the massive fire had truly been. Sorrow reached her heart as she silently wished the forest lilies and known beasts had survived the disaster safely. The white avian sincerely appreciated Alron for choosing to stay alongside her despite the threats looming ahead. For the initial time in numerous months, Alron gazed beyond the same forest scenery that had snared her isolated life for an entire year. Hope gradually replaced isolation after Alron embraced her fresh, coming together with the young witch named Roof. Alron reflected on her weakness as a youthful plant creature as Roof fought with her distrust toward people. Despite their fears and differences, pair girls chose to stay jointly and seek for a safer location to live peacefully. As traveling through the heavens, an enormous avian abruptly appeared above them and silently watched their movements from afar. Uneasiness swiftly scattered through Alron after realizing the unusual beast might be following or monitoring their journey. The huge avian finally soared away, lacking attacking, but the encounter left both travelers cautious as they prepared to land near the forest below. As traveling across the scorched plains, Alron spotted the destruction abruptly finished at the forest border, making the area feel protected by an invisible force. Beyond the timber, a remote tower city emerged on the horizon before Rufy eventually descended and touched down carefully near the forest entrance. Exhaustion coated Rufy's face after spending so far stamina bearing Alron through the heavens during their escape from danger. Jointly, the pair cautiously stepped farther into the unknown forest as observing for threats hiding among the enormous trees and shadows nearby. Once they halted to rest, hunger swiftly turned a issue as Alron started worrying about how Roof would obtain food, shelter, and supplies inside the forest. Interest overcame Roof after learning stories about Alron's sap, causing her to ask if she could flavor it herself. Lacking reluctance, Roof swiftly sampled the sap as Alron reacted with panic and embarrassment beside her. The sugary flavor entirely stunned Roof, causing her overwhelmed by how enjoyable and comforting the nectar felt to her body. Enthusiasm shortly rotated into worry as Rufy questioned for more, forcing Alron to stop her before the nectar became addictive. Despite the warning, Alron still permitted Roof to collect a little amount cautiously. After settling down, the two girls understood the sap bore mending properties when the painful burn marks on Rufy's hands suddenly disappeared completely. Rufy cheerfully praised Alron's peculiar skills, as Alron acknowledged she still found the witch's bird transformation far more surprising. Ideas about Rufy's enigmatic floating magic kept to amaze Alron as the pair lay inside the forest jointly. After noticing the bucket was drying out, Alron understood she urgently required more water to stay well and active. Roof instantly chose to seek the forest for a nearby water source. The white avian bore Alron through the timber until they finally uncovered a large pond hidden deep within the forest. Enthusiasm swiftly covered Alron after seeing the gigantic pool, though Roof remained cautious because the water looked dirty and unsafe. Although the pool gazed muddy and hard for people to drink from, Alron believed the water would still be safe for a plant monster like herself. As Roof cautiously inspected the pool, unusual bubbles suddenly began rising from beneath the dark water without warning. Threats swiftly neared as Roof shouted for caution just before a mighty force erupted violently from the pond's surface. The sudden assault sent water and sludge soaring everywhere as pair girls were thrown backward in confusion and panic. Alron instantly concerned after losing sight of Roof amid the chaos. Instants later, Roof was fired upward into the sky above the forest, as drops scattered across the battlefield below. After being hurled into the sky by the sudden explosion, Roof fought to open her eyes as water coated her face completely. Pair girls collided back into the muddy pool region as buckets, tendrils, and water scattered violently around them. Alron swiftly understood something deadly encircled the pool after several large shapes began moving beneath the water nearby. Terror scattered across her face when enormous crocodile-like creatures gradually surfaced from the pond and stared directly toward her position. Alron recognized she could be slain instantly by their gigantic maw. Before the creatures could assault, piles of huge bones abruptly collapsed nearby, causing Alron shocked by the terrifying scene surrounding the pond. Facing the huge reptile creatures, Alron frantically emitted her pollen in an attempt to stop herself from being eaten alive. The brutal present dragged Alron farther underwater as multiple crocodile creatures surrounded her from every direction. Roof was nowhere in sight amid the bewilderment. As sinking beneath the pool, Alron swiftly seized an aquatic plant and employed it to help herself survive underwater longer. Alron concentrated fully on escaping the deadly reptiles circling around her spot. The creatures kept chasing her through the dark water as their enormous maw shut in from every side without slowing down. As snared underwater, Alron spotted the reptile creatures fighting each other over who would capture and eat her first. Their brutal motions formed an enormous whirlpool that abruptly dragged Alron away from the center of the pond. After losing consciousness momentarily, Alrone woke inside a fast-moving stream distant from the creatures and unknown surroundings replaced the dark pond. She understood the water present was bearing her someplace farther into the forest. Terror swiftly returned when Alrone recognized she had turned entirely separated from Roof, with no idea how to reunite again. The rushing stream fired Alrone out of the water and hurled her brutally onto the forest earth nearby. After crashing out of the stream, Alrone painfully touched down on the muddy earth before noticing a huge toad creature nearby. The unusual beast silently examined Alrone, lacking attacking, making her realize the frog monster did not appear hostile at all. Shortly later, the toad abruptly started croaking loudly while hopping around the area as if trying to signal or warn something nearby. As healing from the exhausting flea, Alrone suspected the stream had intentionally bore her away from threat instead of throwing her out randomly. She also felt reassured that her bucket still contained sufficient water to endure. Despite her bewilderment and terrible luck, Alrone compelled herself to keep shifting because locating Roof remained her most important goal. Alrone stretched one of her tendrils upward into the forest canopy, as seeking the region carefully for any sign of Roof nearby. Reassurance momentarily reached Alrone after learning Roof's speech, but bewilderment followed when the witch suddenly warned her to keep the vine raised. Instants later, Roof seized the tendril and lifted Alrone upward into the sky just before danger reached the ground below them. From above the timber, Alrone eventually spotted multiple big animal monsters moving through the forest beneath their previous location. Terror swiftly returned as Alrone understood the forest contained distant, more deadly beasts and hidden threats than she originally expected. After escaping the deadly creatures, Alrone and Roof eventually discovered a silent place deep within the forest where they could rest safely. Chilly sky encircled the region as Rufa continued shivering from the water earlier, making Alrone worry that the witch might become sick. Employing a unique skill obtained from consuming an unusual plant, Alrone wrapped her vines around Roof to share warmth and protect her body from the cold. The sudden closeness felt peculiar to pair of them. Reassurance gradually emerged on Roof's face after the heat from Alrone's tendrils eased the freezing temperature around them. Meanwhile, Alrone turned painfully aware that her tendrils could plainly sense each motion and touch from Roof's body. As observing the exhausted Roof rest nearby, Alrone understood the isolated witch had hardly eaten properly since losing her parents long ago. The silent forest eventually turned tranquil as Roof lay beside Alrone, trusting her enough to fall asleep together safely. Thanks covered the atmosphere after Roof appreciated Alrone for aiding and shielding her during the dangerous journey through the forest. Alrone then recognized that, with Roof's soaring magic, she could now journey distant beyond the forest and even confront foes from her painful past life. Despite those ideas of revenge, Alrone chose she no longer desired to drag Roof into her aged grudges because she eventually had someone precious beside her. Alrone concentrated on existence initial, hoping to secure heat, nourishment, and a safe shelter for both herself and Roof. Jointly, the pair chose to build a tranquil dwelling inside the forest where they could eventually live without fear or loneliness. Shining glows scattered through the silent forest as Alrone dozed beside her small companion under the tangled trees. Innumerable fireflies floated between the branches, encircling the relaxing pair and filling the dark woods with pale light. The tranquil scene kept deep into the night. Sunshine eventually reached the forest floor. Sitting close to the rootlets, Alrone gradually untangled the tendrils wrapped around her body as recovering from sleep. Recollections of the drifting glows lingered inside her mind like an unusual dream. An uncomfortable thirst stayed after she awoke, causing her feel restless. Wrinkled tendrils displayed that her body lacked sufficient water. Since the nearby pool contained reptiles, Alrone chose to seek elsewhere for a safer source. A booming growl reverberated through the forest as Alrone silently sat alongside her small companion near the giant trees. Hunger shortly turned to issue anew. Although more sap was requested, Alrone rejected and observed the childlike maiden suck her thumb instead. The habit recalled Alrone of a toddler, so she softly halted the behavior before it turned normal. Interest replaced the awkward instant later. Questions about age made Alrone to confidently declare that she was already 10 years aged. Behind her composed face, Alrone reflected on her long earlier existence as a student saint. And eventually, Alrone realizing her true mental age was far older. Alrone maintained that being 10 years aged formed her older and more accountable than her 1-year-old partner. With complete confidence, she chose to attention for the smaller maiden, like an older sister shielding a kid in the forest. The claim instantly made irritation. Her partner rejected the notion as Alrone steadily placed a hand on her head. After the argument settled, the little blossom maiden sought through her robe pocket and disclosed a strange plant collected the previous day. The plant rotated out to be a sundew, a carnivorous kind that snared bugs with tacky hairs. Since Alrone could securely devour botanical creations, the useful discovery turned precious food for her. Cautiously, Alrone ate the carnivorous plant because it aided reduce the dryness scattering through her body. Awkwardness crossed her face after noticing the tangled tendrils covering her look. Forest existence had already left her gazing entirely unkempt. Instead than fretting about suitable clothing, existence turned the greater priority as hunger slowly worsened. Meanwhile, her little partner required more than sap and produce to stay healthy, forcing both of them to search for better food sources nearby. Ideas of chasing shortly trailed. Offered her feeble state, Alrone concluded that catching frogs in the forest would likely be the securest and simplest option available. Alrone shortly spotted a big toad sitting nearby in the forest, quietly staring toward her and her companion without moving away. Recognition swiftly emerged on her face after remembering the same toad from the earlier day. Deep inside, Alrone suspected the beast might have aided her endure earlier. Doubt still stayed despite the unusual feeling. As observing the toad cautiously, she questioned if it had intentionally remained near them since yesterday. No response originated after she attempted understanding the beast's goal. Instead, the toad gradually neared through the grass as pair girls watched cautiously. Terror steadily replaced interest once the big toad moved closer. Abruptly, a tacky licker shot forward at incredible speed toward Alrone's path. Lacking warning, the huge toad fired its long licker toward Alrone and her companion from across the forest clearing. Pair girls were abruptly dragged forward at frightening speed after the tacky licker wrapped tightly around them. Alarm scattered across Alrone's face as her partner frantically grabbed onto a nearby surface to avoid being dragged away completely. The truth eventually turned clear to Alrone. The beast had never guarded her before, and only viewed pair girls as prey to devour. Before the toad could swallow them, something peculiar caught Alrone's attention. A little blue blossom lay inside the beast's mouth, creating sudden bewilderment during the dangerous struggle. Terror emerged on Rufei's face amid the assault, causing Alrone to tightly decide she needed to protect her like an older sister. Remembering the sundew plant, Alrone swiftly coated her tendrils with tacky hairs and emitted thick mucus across the surface. The fresh skill worked instantly. Her slippery tendrils wrapped around the toad's licker and firmly bound the creature before it could escape. Tacky mucus scattered everywhere later, causing Alrone entirely covered while Ruf stared at the strange scene in confusion. Only then did Alrone understand Rufei had also turned snared inside the tangled tendrils. Luckily, the mucus loosened the binding sufficient for pair girls to distinct securely. Alrone ordered Rufei to flee farther into the forest as she kept restraining the huge frog alone. Instead of rushing away powerlessly, Ruf abruptly changed into an avian and flapped into the air above the battle. Surprise instantly crossed Alrone's face after realizing Ruf had held the skill to free herself the whole time. Before she could react farther, the struggling toad tightened its licker anew and brutally pulled Ruf back toward its mouth. The deadly beast eventually managed in swallowing Ruf entire. Darkness encircled the little blossom maiden as the toad trapped her inside its massive body. After being gulped, Ruf assaulted from inside the toad by combining toxic spores with tacky thorn-covered vines that slowed the monster's movements. Agony scattered through the beast instantly. Brutal roars reverberated across the forest as the toad fought against the poison filling its body. Since Alrone was no longer nearby, Ruf emitted even more spores lacking holding back and kept weakening the huge predator. Instants later, the exhausted toad eventually collapsed onto the earth. Dense mist of spores drifted around its motionless body as the fight originated to an end. Abruptly, Alrone hurried forward from the forest, causing Ruf to alarm after noticing another deadly issue approaching nearby. Reassurance instantly overwhelmed Alrone after Ruf securely fled the huge frog alive. She firmly embraced the smaller maiden lacking reluctance. Bewilderment shortly emerged on Ruf's face as Alrone kept holding her closely, still shaken by the dangerous battle moments earlier. After settling down, pair girls discussed locating water anew since Alrone's thirst had not vanished, despite defeating the monster. Interest then returned to Alrone's mind. She questioned why Ruf had not changed into an avian sooner to flee the tendrils amid the attack. Rufei could only stare back uneasily, lacking understanding the issue herself. Silence trailed momentarily beneath the dark heavens before Alrone softly placed her hand on Rufei's head, reassuring her after the frightening experience. As relaxing after the fight, Alrone and Ruf abruptly heard an unknown voice somewhere near the fallen frog. Bewilderment scattered between them as the supposedly beaten beast surprisingly began moving again across the ground. Lacking warning, dense mucus erupted outward from the toad's body, causing something little to slide from inside the monster. A soaked youthful maiden eventually emerged from the slime, covered mess alongside the frog. Surprise instantly covered Alron and Roof after realizing the unusual remnant was actually a tiny fairy trapped inside the creature all along. The unusual sprite gradually regained consciousness after being dragged from the beaten frog's body covered in slime and mucus. Frail coughing fled from her throat as she understood she had somehow endured being trapped inside the monster for so long. Nearby, Rufe felt reassured after confirming that her medicine-infused sap had effectively guarded the sprite from the toxic pollen released during the battle. Guilt shortly crossed the sprite's face after discovering how recklessly the toxin had scattered across the forest during the fight against the frog. After settling down, the rescued maiden introduced herself as Kiri, a sprite dwelling within the forest, as thanking Alron and Roof for saving her life. Kiri swiftly justified her pride after learning doubts about her graceful look as still covered in sticky slime. Shortly later, she clarified that her earlier actions had actually aided Alron endure the dangerous river and pond nearby. Amid the conversation, Kiri acknowledged she had covertly examined Alron and Roof after spotting a peculiar human and Alron traveling together through the forest. The sprite finally disclosed that she controlled the pool water before rescuing Alron from the stream afterward. Realizing the misunderstanding, Kiri eventually relaxed around them. By the finish of the conversation, pair sides embraced each other calmly. Kiri clarified how the toad later seized her, as Roof appreciated the fairy for helping them survive. After the introductions finished, Alron steadily questioned the sprite for a suitable name while the group continued resting together. Kiri shortly questioned why Alron and Roof had stepped in such a deep and deadly part of the forest solitary. Worry instantly emerged on Kiri's face after learning they desired to remain nearby. She cautioned them that the region contained numerous concealed threats. Instead, Kiri recommended shifting toward the eastward side of the forest, which was far safer than their present position. Since neither Alron nor Roof recognized the forest well, they wished somebody could guide them there. Sugary sap swiftly altered Kiri's mood. Delighted by the flavor, the sprite cheerfully consented to lead pair girls toward a safer place. After accepting Kiri's instruction, Alron questioned Roof to change into a avian anew and carry her through the forest. Shortly later, the band journeyed through the heavens together, while Kiri rested comfortably beside Alron during the flight eastward. Midway through the journey, a sudden shadow passed overhead. Bewilderment scattered across Alron's face after noticing a big avian advancing rapidly from above. The circumstance instantly turned deadly once a huge eagle appeared in the open sky and locked onto the smaller flying group below. Terror returned instantly after Alron identified the predator from before. The enormous raptor dived toward them anew as she frantically urged Roof to escape faster. The huge raptor swiftly obtained a far on the group, and Alron realized Roofy could no longer outrun the dangerous predator. Lacking reluctance, Alron emitted multiple long tendrils into the air and prepared to fight back against the attacking eagle herself. Toxic blossoms erupted open instants later, scattering mist of pollen directly toward the giant bird during its rapid descent. Sadly, the beast was too big to halt instantly. Ignoring the toxin, the raptor smashed into the band with immense force and sent everyone crashing violently out of the sky together. Branches snapped noisily throughout the forest amid the fall. After the impact eventually finished, Alron gradually lifted herself from the shattered timber while catching her breath in relief. Kiri laughed in reassurance and guided the band toward a nearby stream to wash away the tacky toad mucus. Amid the walk, Alron questioned why the huge raptor had assaulted them anew. Kiri clarified that the beast was known as a forest guardian, causing the circumstance even stranger. Suspicion gradually grew in Alron's mind after remembering that creatures only turned hostile after Kiri joined their band. She started questioning if the sprite herself was being targeted. A startling explanation shortly trailed. Sprites were seemingly weighed precious prey and delicacies among numerous dangerous monsters living in the forest. Not long later, the band eventually reached alongside a peaceful lake hidden deep within the forest. The band eventually relaxed alongside the silent pond, washing away the remaining slime and recovering from the dangerous encounters inside the forest. Later, Kiri recommended a nearby rocky region as a secure location where Alron and Rufy could settle down temporarily. Before causing, the sprite vowed to see them anew someday and offered future help if they ever needed assistance in the forest. Since Kiri vanished, suspicions swiftly returned to Alron's mind. Something about the sprite's behavior still felt hard for her to trust entirely. Cautiously, Alron cautioned Roof to stay cautious around sprites. Age stories stated they often misled wanderers and could covertly collect others to trap careless victims. Rufay turned puzzled after learning Alron distrusts sprites despite trusting her entirely, even though she was also considered a monster. Smiling gently, Alron reassured Roof that she felt secure around her because she was harmless, adorable, and nearer to a plant than a deadly beast. Hunger shortly disrupted the conversation.
As Roof demanded more sap anew, Alron chose they should catch fish from the nearby pond instead. Acting confidently as the accountable older sister, Alron readied herself to collect suitable food rather than relying only on nectar and plants. Instance later, Rufe employed her skills close the water, releasing bursts of stamina while preparing to help with the fishing effort beside the lake. Employing her tendrils skillfully, Roof dragged multiple fish from the pond and tossed them onto the shore one after another. Pleased of the successful catch, she cheerfully presented the pile of fish to Alron as expecting praise for her hard work. Instead, Alron instantly questioned whether the fish were still secure to consume after Roof had coated the pond with poison earlier. Resolved to work this time, Roof vowed not to use toxins anew and attempted attracting nearby creatures with sweet nectar instead. The aroma swiftly scattered through the forest. Before long, cautious wild creatures gradually emerged from the bushes and started advancing the unusual bait carefully. Employing sugary sap as bait, Rufy effectively collected several small animals near the lake without using poison this time. Once the creatures neared closely sufficient, her tendrils hit quickly and captured them, leaving Roof proudly presenting the fresh meat afterward. Alron, however, instantly rejected the notion of consuming raw meat despite Roof's successful chasing attempt beside the forest. Instead of arguing farther, Alron presented all the seized meat to Roof and questioned only for apples and sap in return for herself. As Roof cheerfully ate nearby, Alron concerned over their entirely different diets and questioned how she could properly care for both of them together. As attempting to endure close the pond, Roofy experimented with rubbing wood together but failed to create fire successfully. Observing silently nearby, Alron started fretting that a plant creature and a human might never truly manage living together peacefully. Meanwhile, Roof steadily kept consuming alongside her, unaware of the growing doubts inside Alron's mind about their coming. After considering cautiously, Alron rejected those fears and chose she would keep working hard so pair of them could remain together no matter what happened. The tranquil instant did not last long. By the following day, Alron's concealed worries abruptly turned reality when something unforeseen occurred to Roof nearby. The next morning, Alron uncovered Roof collapsed unconscious nearby, causing alarm and terror to scatter through the silent lakeside.